Sundays, and she said, yes, everything seemed perfect. Well, almost perfect. Her parents, especially her dad, weren't thrilled about me from the start. They made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for Sarah. It wasn't outright hostility, more like subtle comments that reminded me of my play stuff like, so Matt, what's your 5-year plan? Or, Sarah is used to a certain lifestyle. I ignored it because I loved Sarah and she stood by me. When we started planning a wedding, her parents dropped the prenup bomb. I remember Sarah's dad calling me in his office one evening after dinner. He had this serious look on his face like he was about to give mellow-filtering advice. Instead, he handed me a thick stack of papers and said, "Thesis, just a formality. Matt, it's to protect Sarah's future. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand, and I didn't like it either. I felt insulted. Why did they assume I was going to take advantage of your daughter? I was barely making $40,000 a year at that IT job, but I had plans, big ones. I wanted to prove myself not just to them, but to Sarah and myself. Still, I didn't want to cause problems, so I took the papers home and read through them with a mix of anger and confusion. A prenup basically stated that if Sarah and I ever divorced, I'd walk away with nothing but what I'd earned. Myself, none of her family's money, none of the assets she might inherit, nothing. It was all about protecting her, not us. I hated every line of it. I brought it up to Sarah, hoping she'd back me up. Instead, she said, "Matt, it's not a big deal. It's just paperwork. It doesn't change how I feel about you." She was calm, but I could tell she felt stuck between me and her family. I didn't want to put her in that position, so I swallowed my pride and signed it. I told myself it didn't matter because I wasn't marrying her for her family's money. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake, letting her parents set the tone for our marriage. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I figured they'd warm up to me eventually, and the prenup would be a non-issue since we were building a life together from scratch. The wedding itself was beautiful, but also a bit awkward. My family and hers didn't mix well. My brothers and a few of my cousins showed up in suits they'd borrowed or bought on sale, while Sarah's side looked like they'd stepped out a country club catalog. There was no drama, but the divide was obvious. After we got married, moved into a small apartment in Denver, Sarah started teaching at a local elementary school, and I kept grinding away at my IT job. Those first few years were tough but rewarding. We budgeted carefully, cooked most meals at home, and saved every penny we could. Her parents would occasionally make comments about our tight budget, but we didn't care. We were happy. Still, the prenup lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't like it hot we'd ever need it, but it symbolized something deeper. It felt like her family didn't trust me even after I'd married Sarah and started building a life with her. Every time her dad made a sarcastic remark about my job or our financial situation, it stung. I worked harder because of it. I wanted to prove them wrong, but the prenup never really went away. There were moments, small and fleeting, where it came up in conversation. Sarah's mom would joke about how smart they'd been to have me sign it, or her dad would bring it up when talking about protecting family assets. They said it with smiles, but it always felt like a slap in the face. Still, I didn't say anything. I kept my head down and focused on my career. I loved Sarah, and I didn't want to let her parents ruin what we had. I figured as long as we were happy, none of that other stuff mattered. But now, years later, I can see how that prenup was more than just a legal document. It was a reminder that her family didn't think I was enough, and as things started to shift in our lives, that piece of paper became the center of a storm I never saw coming. After a few years of grinding it out in my IT job, things started to change, but not overnight. It was more like little victories stacking up until they became something bigger. I was 27 when I got my first big break, but getting there wasn't as smooth as I would have liked back then. I was still working at the IT firm in Denver. The pay wasn't bad at the time, but it wasn't great either. I had been at the company for about 4 years, and I felt like I'd hit a wall. My role was stable, but it didn't challenge me, and there wasn't much room for growth. I knew if I wanted to make real progress, I'd have to take a risk. One of my coworkers, Jason, had started talking about this side hustle he'd gotten into. Freelance coding for startups. At first, I thought it sounded sketchy, like he was going to burn out juggling 2 jobs. But then Hesh showed me his paycheck for 1 month off freelance work, and my jaw hit the floor. The guy was making double what we earned at our full-time gig. That got me thinking. I had always been good at web development and problem solving. I spent my weekends brushing up on coding languages, learning frameworks, and experimenting with side projects. Sarah thought I was crazy for spending so much time on it. "You're already working full-time," she'd say. "Why are you adding more work?" But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was an opportunity. After about 6 months of freelancing on the side, I landed a client. That completely changed the game for me. They were a small tech startup looking for someone to build their entire backend system. The pay was more than I'd ever made in a single project, but they also had stock options they offered as part of the deal. At first, I wasn't sure if stock options were worth much, but something about the company's vision clicked with me. So I took the gamble for the next year. I worked like a maniac. I was still at my day job, putting in 40 hours a week, but I spent every free moment working on this startup project, weekends, late nights, you name it. Sarah wasn't thrilled about it. She supported him, but I could tell she was frustrated that I wasn't as present as I used to. Bet here were arguments, mostly small ones about me missing dinners or being glued to my laptop when we were supposed to have movie nights. I'd always say, just a little longer, I promise, but I don't think either of us believed it. Then, if happened to start up, I was working with got acquired by a bigger company and misstock options skyrocketed in value in ADE. I was struggling to keep up with our mortgage and car payments. The next, I had enough to pay off everything and still have a healthy cushion. I'll never forget the look on Sarah's face when I told her. She was stunned in a good way, but I think part of her couldn't believe it was real. That moment was a turning point. He quit my IT job. The following week, something I had been dreaming of 4 years. My boss didn't take it well. He tried to guilt trip me into staying, saying things like,